Hello and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sara, and I am so thrilled that today we have with us the wonderful duo of Charles and Dylan from the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast.
That's us.
Yes, hello.
Yeah, we're pumped.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Happy to have you.
It's so nice to be the hosts this time. You get to be our guests.
I was going to say it's super nice to be the guest this time. I'm just sitting here. I'm going with the flow. I'm not recording or responsible for editing, whatever Dylan might say.
Yeah, you're responsible for all the things I might say at this point from here on out. So.
Oh, wait, can I do that? Sarah, it's always your fault now.
No, that's not how it works.
I'm sorry, Dylan set the precedent. I'm allowed to do that.
But see, Dylan is the Sarah of their duo, so I get to do that. You don't get to.
I called dibs. I'm sorry, I called dibs.
Rude.
Before this devolves into too much nonsense, let's kick.
Too late.
I know. It's going to be a good show. Let's kick this off with something great that happened this week. Sara, I know you prepared something, so I'll call on you first.
I did. So Neil Gaiman announced that there's going to be a season 2 of Good Omens, and I am cautiously optimistic. So that qualifies for my something good.
Cautious optimism. That's still great. It's better than dread, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more enthusiastic about season 2 than I was about season 1 when it was first announced. So,
I mean, they've proven their chops, right?
Yeah.
It's a great show. I liked it.
Yeah, I was kind of astounded to learn that both of you had watched it. I didn't realize that was the case.
Yeah, we're big TV fans, so we see a lot of stuff.
So now I have to get you guys to read Good Omens.
You could probably talk me into that.
Okay.
You got us to read Wyrd Sisters, so Good Omens won't be that hard of a sell.
I will keep that under consideration.
How about either of you? Anything great happen?
Dylan, would you like to do the honors of...
I started playing tennis again after a pretty long break. So, yeah, that's pretty big for me. Tennis, big part of my life. So, but I wasn't playing for a while. Had a little injury, so started playing again. I'm excited to get back into it.
Oh, that's great. And just in time to enjoy the summer.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, for me, I guess I would say I have my mother's coming to visit. I just moved, so doing a lot of like home improvement stuff, and I barely know how to hold a drill. So the little accomplishments, like, I hung a shelf today. It's like, it's pretty awesome. And then, we got to, record recently with just a quick plug for Fantasy for the Ages. Jim and Zach, they had us on their show, and that was so much fun too. So always excited to talk fantasy, and I've been looking forward to this. We planned this months ago, so I'm just like super excited that this day's finally come.
I know we've been like watching this episode steadily approach on our calendar, like. It's the Friends Talking Fantasy episode. It's finally here.
I know. It's exciting. I'll say really quickly, I've already told the story like maybe twice on our show, but I'll say it really quickly at the top here. When we did All Systems Red, the Murderbot Diaries on our show, I get 2 separate text messages from my parents separately, and they're like, that show you did with those two women, it was really good. And I was like, okay, like something about our collaboration really spoke to them and they loved it, and that's kind of like what they keep going back to is that episode. I'm like, okay, I see. So our fans loved you guys on, and so we're super happy to return the favor now.
I think your parents have good taste.
Yeah.
Fantastic taste.
I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. It was a great episode. And I was like, have you read All Systems Red? No, neither one of them have read it, but they enjoyed the episode anyway. I don't know what they got out of it, but they enjoyed it.
My mom listens to our episodes and hasn't read any of the books either. I don't know.
She's bought some of them though, hasn't she?
Yeah.
I'm just very excited to hear if your wonderful mother Rosemary, Charles, if she happens to bring it up again when she's visiting. So, and tell her I say hi, Charles.
Well, I'll do that, and I'll have, when this episode airs, I'll have something else for them to listen to.
Be like, okay, yeah, let us know next time that Sara and Lily are on.
Yeah, right.
Well, my great thing is that I went camping last weekend. A friend of mine organized an all vaccinated women camping trip to the Olympic Peninsula. And so we went out there for 4 days, and it was during the middle of the heat wave in the Pacific Northwest. So it was a situation. But
are you like an experienced camper, or was this like some new ground for you?
I am.
Okay. Awesome.
I don't usually go camping in like 115-degree heat, though.
Yeah, I can see that.
That sounds kind of miserable.
We did go hiking at a rainforest. It was like walking through soup.
Pleasant.
But I got out of the house. I saw a new place. It was so wonderful.
Wow, that is exciting. That is a good thing.
Other than that, anyone read anything good lately other than podcast stuff? Because we all know everything that we read for this podcast is good.
Okay, I'm gonna. Can we say stuff that we're reading over for FTF? Artifact Space by Christian Cameron. Well, Miles Cameron is the name that he uses when he's writing sci-fi and fantasy. Is really awesome. I'm really enjoying that one. And I'm going to be a broken record with the tennis stuff because I'm kind of getting back into it. Open by Andrzej Agassi. Yeah.
Yeah, get used to it.
I don't mean to keep bringing it up, but I am reading it, and it's a really good book. So, yeah, that's been enjoyable. Of course, went to Wyrd Sisters and pumped to get into discussing that. Yeah, full disclosure, I didn't reread the Witcher stuff in anticipation of this, but it's up here from our last read of it.
Yeah, Dylan and I have a very identical reading schedule between Witcher, Wyrd Sister, and Artifact Space. That's kind of taken up all my reading commitments, and I was enjoying.
Yeah, when you pick up Open by Andrzej Agassi, Charles. Next up, right?
Yeah, that's the next on my TBR.
I haven't seen it on our schedule.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I haven't read that one yet, but.
And you guys did have a wonderful interview with Miles Cameron, right?
Oh, yeah, he's a great guy.
That I feel like this is a good opportunity for you to plug that as well, because I really enjoyed listening to that.
Yeah, so right before the book was released, we had the opportunity to interview him. He was a super awesome guy and super generous with his time and experience. And he's got a really cool Twitter account. He does these videos called Writing Fighting, which I recommend any fan of fiction fans and any fan of ours to check that out over on the Twitter sphere. And then, yeah, we're going to have him back on to discuss the book in all of its spoiler-filled glory sometime next week. We have to schedule it, but yeah.
Yeah, he's an awesome dude.
Well, I can't wait. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, he's great.
Sarah, you have to ask the next question, so it's not me the whole time.
Okay, I will, but are you going to respond to what you've been reading?
Books for the podcast. I went camping. I don't have an answer.
My answer for what I've been reading is Towers of Midnight. I was hoping to finish last night, but then it was 11 o'clock and I still had 140 pages left. And I was I'm going to bed.
I saw you tweeting that last night and I was like, wow, mad props if you could finish it. So when you told me you did, and I was like, okay, at least you're not like some kind of like insanely fast reader.
I was a little too optimistic there, but I do really want to finish it tonight. We'll see if that happens. It's only 140 pages. Like that's an hour and a half tops of reading, probably.
You are a fast reader.
So like,
I believe in you.
I can do it. I am a pretty fast reader. Don't ask me how well I remember things that I read, but
not relevant.
I do at least read them. Yeah. Okay, so last question, very important, the most important. What is everyone drinking tonight?
I'll go first. I did a throwback to the days where Charles and I used to hang out in New Orleans when he lived there, and we would drink a lot of this Abita Brewing Company. Abita Purple Haze is a raspberry lager, apparently.
Whoa.
Yeah, I just grabbed it because for old time's sake, Charles, when was the last time?
Yeah, I appreciated the Purple Haze.
Yeah, maybe one of these days we'll all get to a con in New Orleans or something and have.
I love that.
Have some of these. That would be the dream.
Yeah, that's the dream right there.
And Charles, what are you drinking?
Right. So, this was something that I've been preparing for. Like we said earlier, this recording's been on the books for a while, and I know you guys always do the what are you drinking at the beginning. So I did some research and I think I found the right drink. So there's a website called Lemon Baby. Don't ask me how I found it. Google search. And they had a Witcher themed cocktail called the White Wolf that has Earl Grey tea in it as well. So I was like, Witcher tea cocktails. I'm combining all of it today. It's got rye whiskey, vermouth, Earl Grey, and then bitters and orange and cherry.
Ooh,
so
that sounds lovely.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's nice. I'm gonna show it off to the Zoom chat here, but it's good. I like it. I've never had it before, but I'm excited that I got to combine all these different things into the show today. So I'm very excited.
Would you make it again?
The next time I'm on a Witcher themed podcast with other tea enthusiasts, I would highly recommend it. But yeah, it's basically like an old fashioned plus tea and vermouth. It's basically what it is.
It's also just the iconic Friends Talking Fantasy fiction fans crossover drink. This is the only time that it's appropriate.
Exactly. So I highly recommend it.
And I have to retire it afterward.
Yeah, exactly. If you're going to do a fiction fans collab, I highly recommend it. It's pairing really well right now.
And Lily?
I am drinking a Chardonnay from the Columbia Valley. And it counts as local if it's within state, right?
100%.
That counts as local.
Yeah. But I had to go white wine because it is too hot to drink something not cold.
Also, I just want to point out that it's not from a box, which
That's
is
true.
Wow.
The whole bottle and everything.
Breaking out the fancy stuff for Friends Talking Fantasy.
Yeah. We have guests on.
Yeah, sounds like you guys are moving
living
up
the high life over there,
nice.
Lily.
No, we just respect you. That's all.
We'll take it.
Give all the respect to Charles, please. Yeah, I definitely don't deserve
it. And Sarah, yourself?
I have gone back to my good old standard of Blindwood cider. I have mentioned them on the podcast before, but they're a local cidery, and the people who run it are lovely, and I love them a lot. And everyone should go and buy their cider.
Nice.
Yeah, I've only had some generic name brand ciders so far.
Angry Orchard.
Yep, I've had that, which is good. But I feel like you need to kind of take me under your wing a little bit, Sarah, and get me into the world of cider some more.
Yeah, Angry Orchard is okay. It's a little too sweet for me.
Yeah.
I know Benjamin, that's at Literature and Lo-Fi. He works for a cidery or a cider company over in the UK. So he can probably give you some good advice too.
Oh, so between the two of you, I'm more well connected than I thought in the apple cider world, right?
You're entrenched in the cider community.
I didn't realize how good my network was. That's
we'll turn you into one of us.
Absolutely.
Now, Sarah, you gave us a little teaser with the fact that you've been reading Wheel of Time, but I also saw your flurry of texts while you were reading it, so.
So I do have a little bit of a Wheel of Time check-in for us today. I'm not going to do anything super spoilery because, Dylan, I know that you haven't read this entire series yet.
No.
So I'm a little ahead of you.
Appreciate it, Sarah.
Of course. This is not like when you're listening and you can just skip ahead.
Yeah, Lily, can't you just tell me what time to skip ahead to in the future? I thought that's how this
Dylan,
works.
just walk out of the room for a second. I want to talk to you a time.
Just mute me. Get me out of here. Just kick me from the room, Lily.
Yeah, Lily, boot her from the thing.
Anyway, so Wheel of Time. I'm not going to name names, but person A and person B saw each other and fell madly in love because they're both beautiful people, and heaven forbid that single people in an epic fantasy series stay single. And I'm mad. I'm real mad.
In every book of Wheel of Time, that person A and person B fall madly.
At least there's because it happens earlier in the series. Okay. There's a little more time for the relationship to develop, and for these are both. I don't want to call them minor characters, but they're not major characters. And it was just so out of left field. It was so random. And it frustrated me.
No, I hear you, Sarah. I have
I've
said on our podcast, kind of, made similar noises about this. So just I like to say Robert Jordan has a lot of talent when it comes to character writing and relationship
Romance
writing,
is
and
not one of
slow
them.
burn romance is not among them.
No.
Yeah, he's just like, oh yeah. Charles says Charles, you said that thing about how he's like got the right people together, but he doesn't know how to get them actually to there, so he just skips ahead, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's a great planner, great world builder. He puts the right people together, but sometimes, it's an older book. We love it, warts and all. But I see exactly what you're saying, Sarah. I think I know which people you're talking about, although it's been a while since I've read past book 4, but I agree.
Yeah, it's just let single people be single. I mean, to be fair, Wheel of Time is not the only series where I have this issue, but since it's what I was reading, that's what I'm complaining about.
It is an issue in the fantasy genre that like everyone's storyline has to end with them pairing off and a lot. I think some of the newer stuff I'm seeing is moving away from that, but yeah, it's pretty rampant. I feel like, especially in older stuff like from the 90s, like Wheel of Time. Although you're probably in the, I don't want to put you on the spot.
This is Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, you're in the Brandon Sanderson stuff. Yeah, I'm glad you have it in front of you so you can check the date. Because I was like, oh, I'm going to put her on the spot. 2000. Okay, you are in the 2000s now?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 2010.
Okay. Oh, wow. Jeez.
I mean, to be fair to Brandon Sanderson, I don't know if this is something that Robert Jordan specifically said, like, I intend for these two characters to end up, which is possible.
Yeah.
But if it's just Brandon Sanderson being like, no, these people are going to fall in love, then shame on you.
Whoa.
Or even
calling out Brandon Sanderson.
He could have, done it well.
Oh.
Yeah.
Brandon Sanderson.
It's not like he was worried about word count, right?
Well, the issue is not that characters got together. The issue is that it was, awkward and ham-fisted. It is my understanding of your complaint. I have not read a single word of these books.
that's about 90% of the complaint. I mean, 10% is that I just want people to stay single more often. Like, not everyone has to pair off, but the majority of my complaint comes from the fact that it's just out of the blue.
Yeah.
Because I know you can appreciate a good romance storyline.
I do sometimes. I mean, I call myself not a romance reader, but I've come to realize that I do actually read a lot more romance than I thought.
Yeah, I know you're a big fan of the way Crystal writes romance and all that, right? So,
Legacy of the Brightwash.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of buildup and a lot of tension, and it's not just these two people see each other and are suddenly madly in love.
Yeah. That's kind of how I feel about romance storylines too, is that idea of like, if it's really badly done, it can like ruin a book, but it can really mess up an experience of reading a book. And if it's then well done, it can really enhance the experience. So yeah, props to Crystal for for getting them from point A to point B in a way that makes sense.
Well, one of the books that we read for this week was The Last Wish by Andrzej Sapkowski, which is a collection of short stories in the Witcher Saga. Many people are probably familiar with this by the series of video games or the Netflix series based on this series, which I have now used 10 times in one sentence.
That was only like 3, Lily. You're good.
Oh, thank you.
They got room for a few more.
We'll see if you can get to 10. Hey, we're drinking now. This is like we don't do this on FPF, so maybe you can just make that into a drinking game where.
Yeah, drink every time I repeat a word too many times. Good luck, everyone at home. Because now I'm going to get into a brief timeline of this series. Just because I think it's really interesting how this series, now I'm doing it on purpose. It did start as short stories and then was compiled into collections and then has a series of novels. But its first adaptation was actually into a series of video games, which I would not consider myself a a huge video game aficionado, but there are definitely people who consider The Witcher one of the best video games of all time, which I just think is important to include in the conversation because this is a story that has been extremely influential in many different media. The first short story was published in a literary magazine in 1986. The translation into English was done in 2007, which was also when the first Witcher video game came out. The third game came out in 2015, which is the one that I'm playing and is, as far as I understand, considered is one of the better ones. The best one, maybe. And then, of course, Netflix did their adaptation, their first season of their series in 2019. So we have a couple decades of this story just sort of growing and expanding and kind of getting picked at different parts of the timeline into different storytelling mediums. And it's just, you don't see that journey in a lot of different places.
Yeah, that's well said. It's definitely, for some reason, it's like multimedia phenomena that's also been like this slow burn that's rapidly more and more ingraining itself in popular culture. I want to say the video game company that made it, CD Projekt Red, is Polish. So that may be the connection there.
Oh, that makes a ton of sense then.
Yeah, I believe that they're Polish. And then when those games got popular, some publisher was like, we got to translate these because everyone in America is playing this game. So yeah. And then from there, it's like, can we get Superman to play The Witcher? Let's try. And now here we are.
I love how the video games, or I should say, the third one, which I am playing, I think all three of them are like far in the future from the short stories in the books, which kind of give them a really cool way of being able to play in the world, but then do their own stories entirely.
Right. I believe Witcher 3 is also far ahead of the Witcher Saga as well. There's like a series of books that's like one long story, and I believe it takes place after all that as well. So you can jump into it and not feel like anything's getting reimagined or spoiled for you or anything like that.
I think we mentioned this when I first started playing it, but the Gwent cards in the video game have a lot of really fun Easter eggs that if you're familiar with the world, add charm. But if you're not, it's just a blurb on a card. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and also just like the different characters you might run into or different just like mentions of a short story that may have been in Last Wish or things like that. There are these Easter egg things that somehow we got world building past the books into RPG video games. So you're like, oh, I remember from the book, from the video game to the show. It's kind of fun. It's kind of fun.
But then the show goes back and is a much more close adaptation of, well, The Last Wish specifically. And Charles, you've read more. Have you read more of them, Dylan? Or is that just
we both read the sort of Destiny as well.
Yeah. Yep. And we watched the TV show. I've never played the video games.
So our question, ours being Sara and mine, when we were talking about this was how much of the show is pulled from later books? Because I would say there were like 2 or 3 short stories that are very closely adapted to the show.
There are some episodes of season 1 that are, because the second book, Sword of Destiny, is a similar style of like a bunch of short story anthology kind of things. So there are some of those short stories that appear in season 1 of the Witcher show. There's one with a dragon, for example, and that is like the first story in Sword of Destiny, I believe. So yeah, they kind of cherry picked.
Okay. One of my big comments is I really loved the characters in the show. And I don't think they all shined quite as brightly in the short stories. But that could have just been because they didn't get as much screen time. So I don't know. Page time.
I also think that it suffered a little bit from the translation. Like to be perfectly honest, I wasn't a huge fan of the translator. It felt a little bit clunky and it felt like I was reading a translation, not that I was reading something that had been written like natively in English.
Yeah.
It's not that you couldn't read it and enjoy it. It's just that I did notice it.
Yeah, I hear you, Sarah. I had something of a similar reaction of like being aware at points in which I was reading, like, this is probably something from the translation and just phrasing stuff. But yeah, and I think comparing the show and the short stories, I do agree with you, Lily, like kind of more nuanced and fleshed out characters in the show in a lot of ways. Like they went for more of this like morally gray, just like aesthetic, and like you could tell Game of Thrones seemed to be something of an influence for the way that they went about it. And then something about the short stories I like is that is almost kind of like missing from the show is this almost like zaniness and this charm to it that there seems to be this kind of like something silly about a lot of it that is just not in the show because the show really doubled down on the gritty dark elements of it.
The show is definitely darker. Because I watched it before I read it, that didn't I didn't have any problem with that when I was watching the show, but I could definitely see how if you were going into it expecting that tone, it would be like, wait, hold on. Hold on a second.
I kind of see it. I also think that the Netflix show made the conscious decision to have not just Geralt of Rivia be a main character. They wanted Ciri to be a main character, and they wanted Yennefer to be a main character. So they're trying to tell all their stories from the beginning and follow them throughout the whole season, which if you follow the story of The Last Wish, like you have to get like to the end of the book before we meet Yennefer, and Ciri isn't even mentioned. We're building up to Ciri. So it's like, okay, well, if you wanted to have both of them knowing that they're famous characters from the games and further books and things like that, we have to tell their story from the beginning. And that's why the show has to like jump around in time so much, where the books just kind of start at the beginning and focus on Geralt and tell Geralt's story the whole way to bring in these other characters. So it's a different way of telling it. And I'm actually okay with the Netflix version.
I actually disagree with you there a little bit. I think I agree that I quite prefer the Netflix version, but two of the things that I thought that it actually had in common with the short stories was how it jumped around in time, because the sort of conceit for this collection is that Geralt is recovering in a temple and he is telling these stories to Iola, one of the priestesses there. And so we're still getting that kind of time jump on a much smaller scale, perhaps.
Yeah, that's fair.
But like that struck me as a similarity when I first started reading it. The
stories are told, I believe, chronologically, but you're right. Yeah, for the frame story takes place after pretty much all of them. So that's true.
I think someone called him the Butcher of Blaviken really early on.
Yeah, I think
and then we see that happen much later.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So
right.
I think
not quite.
Yeah, in the frame story, they call him the Butcher of Blaviken, like really, within. It's been
maybe that's what it is.
Right. But you do get that kind of sensation of jumping through time, like you're talking about, Lily. Yeah.
They also name drop Yennefer right at the beginning, but you don't find out who she is, like Charles was saying, until the end.
Yeah.
Right.
I also, from watching the show, loved Yennefer so much. And so it was such a disappointment.
He's a great presence in the show.
Yeah.
Her and Calanthe. I was a little disappointed with Calanthe. I had not enough that it turned me off of the book, but I was like, ooh, I can see how this character grew into the woman that I loved in the show.
I think the female characters in general in the show were a little bit stronger because it is more, I mean, it was written for modern sensibilities, and this book was written in 1986, I think you said?
The first story.
Okay, so this particular collection was published in 1993.
Yeah.
And it does suffer a little bit from being written in the 90s.
Yeah.
Well, and also taking on sort of a fairy tale aspect. Which is the only way to ignore the fact that 14-year-olds are marrying 30-something-year-olds.
Yeah, still kind of hard to ignore sometimes, right? Like, it's, I don't know. I mean, I think I talked about this on our episode, Charles. I didn't deep dive into it, but yeah, just some things that didn't age well that Charles and I always try on the podcast to view things in their context. You know, we were just talking about Wheel of Time and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, it did not age well and do read as being sexist, I think, now, but I don't want to throw those terms around like at authors or anything like that. It was a different time. So yeah.
No, I feel like this book walked the line pretty well. I would say the worst examples of it were from characters that I wasn't necessarily supposed to like.
Right.
Exactly. Which makes it much easier to swallow. Yes, Stregobor is summoning visions of a person is only described as a naked girl, which is very vague in a troubling way.
Right.
But he's also not a good guy, so maybe that's just supposed to say something about him.
But even the I don't want to say the good guys, but like some of the monsters that we're supposed to root for in the end, they also have pretty misogynistic views.
But not as bad. I will say the worst parts were from bad guys.
Okay, fair, but it does permeate all of the characters' views.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the bad guys.
I would say there's like, little instances scattered throughout where I was like, oh yeah, I don't know if this would fly today. But I also, to shake up the perspective here, what I see is a series that was written in the 80s and published in the early 90s that was maybe actively trying to change some things. I do think like Geralt himself is a, pretty open-minded guy. And like Lily was saying, some of the situations in which there were some of the worst cases, these characters either weren't meant to be liked or weren't particularly likable, or that kind of stuff wasn't portrayed in the most positive way. It was just something that was happening. So in those cases, I like to give it some slack, although I do recognize it as not being perfect by any means. And certainly like just reading descriptions of Yennefer and the weird, it's like, why are they both taking a bath together now that they've just met? Like, she's magic. She couldn't make another bath in another room somewhere. So
that actually, I think because I had the context of the show, like I watched the show first. And so I had seen the relationship develop. So I was like, okay, these two people can fall madly in love. That's fine. There is development there, whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean, bath scenes in The Witcher are just iconic. Let it pass.
That's my story. Okay, so I was watching the show, and Danny, my husband, who has played the games, was watching it with me. And I tried to make a funny joke like, oh, they're trying to make the most out of hiring Superman for this, they're doing this gratuitous bath scene. And he just turns to me and says, this is what The Witcher is.
He's very right. He's 100% right. Like that was a shot-for-shot recreation of a Witcher 3 moment that was very famous. So
the video game opens on Geralt in a bathtub.
Exactly. Yeah. The same like spread eagle feet up on the rim of the bath with his face in between. Yeah, it's a wild shot.
It's a very
weird thing to be famous for. What happened? Oh yeah, definitely.
But it's equal opportunity horny, which we love on this podcast.
We do love on this podcast.
We were talking for a hot second about translations, and then we got a little bit away from us. But I do want to laugh about Dandelion, who is Geralt's bard BFF.
Yeah.
Except his name is Jaskier, which they kept in the show. Another thing that the show got right. And
it's pretty incredible.
It's wild that the true translation of Jaskier is Buttercup, but then they decided that was too girly, so they named him Dandelion in both the books and the game.
I also like how in this book they actually misspell dandelion the entire time. Like they have an I instead of an E, and I believe that changes in the rest of the series, or that's what I've heard anyway.
It does. Yeah. So here's what's interesting, and if anyone, for all you audiobook fans out there listening to this, you'll listen to The Last Wish. It's the same narrator, Peter Kenny, throughout all of them, but in the first one he says Dandelion, and then he, in books 2 and on, he goes to Dandelion. So it's just a total mess because I guess like, oh, I'm not calling this character Buttercup, and I guess we'll call him Dandelion, but maybe we should change it a little bit. No, let's not change it a little bit. Let's bring it back. So it's like whatever. People are only playing the video games anyway. Like that's kind of how it felt when they were treating it. But yeah, it was Dandelion in the audiobook for this one. But then it's just it's like, oh, dandelion. We said dandelion the whole time. What are you talking about? From like book 2 all the way through. There's like funny. 9 of them or something like that. But yeah, it's pretty funny. Yeah.
I didn't know that. I kind of love Dandelion, actually.
It's not a bad name.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Suits him. It suits his personality.
Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely how I pronounced it when I saw it initially. I only pronounced it dandelion because I knew, I had heard that it was supposed to be dandelion.
Yeah.
But I like dandelion.
I do too.
That's what Peter Kenny says anyway.
Dandelion. Yeah.
That's my new headcanon for him. His name is Dandelion.
Nice.
I also loved how they lifted some dialogue, almost word for word, from the book into the show, but in slightly different contexts. But the lines were almost identical. So that was really fun to run into. The line, or the conversation about lesser evil.
I love that one.
I think was a big one.
Yeah. The lesser evil is one of our favorites.
And there was more, but I didn't write it all down.
I don't actually remember the show well enough to have picked up on that.
It was the first episode.
My memory doesn't go back that far. That was December or something. It was a long time ago.
Right. There's this whole thing about when it comes to choosing between two evils, I prefer not to choose at all or something. And it's identical to the English translation as well as the show. So
yeah.
When Lily and I were writing our show notes, we realized that the blurbs on the back of our two copies were different. I don't know if you guys have your copy of The Last Wish handy, but I just thought that it would be interesting to discuss how different they are, because it's kind of funny, actually, in my opinion anyway.
They're also both very wrong, except for one thing, and those one things are different.
Mine was the same one that you have there, Sarah, that I can see on the Zoom call. So I'll let myself off the hook here for not having mine. Right.
I audiobooked it, so I didn't. There was no reading involved.
So first of all, Sarah, I don't think we should read this word for word, but
probably not.
Hers starts with Andrzej Sapkowski is an award-winning blah blah blah, all of his
it's a brief bio of him.
So hers is at the front and center at the top, and mine is at the very end in small font. So that's interesting, just philosophically. I think the only thing they truly have in word for word, not all monsters are evil, and not everything fair is good.
Ooh.
See, the only thing that they have is the evil and not everything fair is good, because mine says, but not everything monstrous looking. It's not even monsters.
Wow. I think mine might be a little better there. I don't know. The back of mine also says, one man holds the line against the demons that plague humanity. There's a whole guild of witchers.
Yeah.
That's not what it's about.
That's categorically false. Yeah. That's not what this is about at all.
Sure, yeah. If someone wants to write that book, great, but that's not this one.
It's just extremely misleading, right? That's not at all this book.
Yeah, not at all. It's not about holding back monsters for the sake of humanity. If anything, it's the opposite.
I loved that about this. I would say that was absolutely my favorite part of this collection of short stories, was the exploration of what is a monster and the difference between monsters and evil, and that whole sort of conversation.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This idea of what makes a monster, and then I also like to say The Witcher is about Geralt fighting monsters and the people that make them, because you these stories, and I think what inspired this RPG style video game is the decision's not always clear for Geralt. He's a monster hunter, but the more he investigates, the more he realizes what other nefarious deeds are going on around the same time, and he has to choose what side he's going to take. And he always tries to do what's right by his own code, and that's not always very clear. So that's what makes these books so great.
It's a really nice reframing of the traditional fairy tale story, where you get a little bit more nuance to it. It's not just that it's black and white, but as you said, the monsters aren't always evil.
Yeah. And he grapples with that sort of monstrous identity himself too, which is interesting. And that's something that doesn't translate as well to the show, when it's Henry Cavill walking around, and it's and it's everyone's scared of me when I walk in a room. It's you just look like Henry Cavill if he got some mud in his hair or whatever. But in the book, he's described more monstrous, and in a way that if he walks into a tavern or whatever, people look at him like he's a monster himself. And he's obviously a Witcher, and that comes with its own like biases that people project onto him. And I feel like, the book does a really good job of exploring his identity struggles with like, I'm a monster hunter, but am I a monster? And then this bit that all y'all were talking about with, are the people out there who are hiring me to kill these quote unquote monsters, the real monsters, and things like that, and the other folks he runs into along the way. And it's like that what makes a monster concept is so freaking cool to watch him explore in so many ways throughout these different forms of media.
And I answered the question a little bit. Well, we answered the question a little bit before I asked it, but that's why you should read this book.
Yeah.
I would say. Yeah. Read it for the conversation on monsters and identity and fun fairy tale retellings.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Second that.
There's some great creatures in here. There's great action pieces. It's a little bit introspective as well. It's kind of this like gothic macabre kind of vibe in certain stories as well, which I really like too.
I definitely glazed over a little bit in some of the action scenes. I was like, this is another page? All right.
Yeah. And I'll say that's
a me problem though.
So when I was first recommended to read The Witcher or even just to watch a show, I actually had this idea in my head that The Witcher, because it was a video game and things like that, was just a like bash 'em, kill the monster type thing. And that's not really my shtick as much as these more like psychological and philosophical questions that are actually explored. So I will say it took me longer to get into The Witcher than maybe I could have, especially because I really enjoy it. So it's like, if there are any folks out there who are like me before I picked it up, who are like, is this going to be exploring things that are actually going to be interesting to me, or is it just going to be a bunch of monster slaying and that's it? Then yeah, I do find it's really interesting. Morality and like you said, Lily, identity, and you said something else that I'm blanking on, but that was really smart.
Me too, but I'm sure it was
good.
To avoid spoilers for The Witcher, skip to 1:03:10. One of the short stories that is almost directly adapted is the story of King Foltest and his daughter, who is cursed to be a monster, whom Geralt saves in both the story and the TV show. The TV show does it in a much more interesting way, I thought. Not that the plot points change at all, but in the story, Geralt just runs into people who tells him what's going on.
It's how they reveal the information that differs.
In the show, he has to actually solve a mystery, which I just thought was more compelling.
I think that the show in general has tighter pacing because it's made for, again, a modern audience in a different medium. And that worked for me a little bit better than the books did. I found the books to be kind of info dumpy at times, whereas you have to work for all of the information that you get in the show.
That's fair. I see The Last Wish. The Witcher was the name of the short story. It's tied with The Lesser Evil for me as my favorite in the book. And I thought it was a great episode of the show as well. I thought the show nailed the look of like the Striga and that whole gothic vibe. It wasn't afraid to get extra grim and violent. So I appreciated all of those things. But I could talk all day about The Witcher. I think it's a fantastic short story. It's the one that was written first and was published first and won all these awards that then inspired the rest of what we've gotten from The Witcher. So it kicked off everything. And it kind of feels like it stands out in that way too. It definitely is more tight and contained, but I thought the book did an excellent job. I do think like a lot of the like pacing issues and dialogue issues come from the translation, but to me, I think this is a fantastic like short story. I think it's great.
I almost entirely agree. I just think the fact that Geralt doesn't have to work for any of the information in the short story. People are just offering him all of this knowledge. And everyone he meets is like, let me tell you everything.
Yeah.
it's just less complicated, which is not a huge complaint. I love that this is one of the first stories because it really introduces that concept of, I think I even fell into it, Witchers are not monster hunters.
Mm-hmm.
They are protectors. And one of the ways that they protect people is by curing cursed people or monsters or whatever. And this does a really good job of not only introducing that, but also introducing the risks of that.
Right. I kind of think of it as like they're monster experts, but they're not necessarily like monster exterminators.
Mm-hmm.
So they know what a Striga is, and they know that they can lift the curse, and he's actually going to try and do that. So that's what I liked about it. But then it's contextualized by all these people coming up to him and being like, hey, I'll pay you money not to kill this creature because of these reasons, or I'll pay you to kill the creature, or I'll pay you to leave right now, or this or that. And it gives you the sense that this town, this kingdom, is so plagued not just by monsters but by their own greed or gluttony or wrath or lust or whatever, that the whole environment is just very toxic and became this breeding ground for a monster. Like, he took something innocent and was so cursed that it became a monster. So I was like, wow, this is like really actually quite interesting if you can look past like what's being presented and kind of read into what's happening. It's a pretty deep story that Andrzej Sapkowski tried to weave in here, and I thought it was very clever.
It introduces Geralt as such a thoughtful, introspective person that I don't think we get as much of in the show.
Yeah.
I will say Geralt is the one character that I think got short-sold in the show. But in this story, he is willing to save this little girl, even though it is much more dangerous. Like, they make it very clear, and that's a very long action scene. He is fighting for his life in a way that he wouldn't have to.
I also like the realism of him saying that, I'll do my best to save her, but like if it's her life or mine, I'm going to prioritize my life. So it's not just that he's blindly trying to save everyone. I mean, he is trying to save everyone, but he's also a realist.
Yeah. But he's not taking the shortcut of, well, I'll just kill her and get it over with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people, and he was getting offered money just to not do anything.
Yeah.
So he could have just turned around and left and made all the money. So that's what's so interesting about Geralt. He is very practical and very much a realist, but sometimes he'll make the dangerous choice.
He's a man of morals too.
Yeah. But like his own weird morals, not like I'm just going to do the good thing all the time. It's like, I'm going to puzzle this out and do what I think is best, which is what makes it so interesting.
That introspection that y'all been talking about, as well as just his, I guess he's got this almost intellectual curiosity about morality and things like that, where he's every new person that he talks to, and that's kind of how I remember this short story being, is just like he goes to one person and they tell him like, hey, yeah, definitely do this, like this is the best play with the Striga, and then another person, and then it's like it's always more complicated. But something that Geralt does is he doesn't lock himself into the first thing he starts thinking is the right path. He's always questioning and he's always listening to the next person in front of him, trying to take it in and fit it into his own very nuanced and complicated moral code. And like you've all been saying, a great introduction to the Witcher and Geralt. Yeah.
He's almost a scientist in that way. He's always willing to see the new information and change his conception of what's going on based on the whatever he's finding out.
Yeah.
It's much more thoughtful. Okay, I have this headcanon.
Let's hear it.
The Netflix show Geralt, we all know he's a himbo.
He does think with his muscles.
He is not displayed as this like thoughtful, considerate person as we are seeing in the books.
It's tough because he's externally so much just like grunting and humming and things like that. And the show, just by nature of the format, almost has to be exclusively external. I mean, they're not. I don't think the show would be positively affected by Geralt internal monologue or something. But yeah, it feels like
he could have talked to Roach a little more.
It's something that I feel like he displays it in his behaviors in the show.
That's
that
true.
He's got this complicated morality, but you don't get to see the process. You get the destination that you know he must be thinking through it. Because of what he decides to do and how it's not always the easy choice. But in the books, you get to see the journey more. And I mean, yeah,
I think he's a lot angrier in the show than he is in the books. And he expresses that anger in a not necessarily healthy way. Like, he's really mean to Jaskier, for example.
Sarah, I totally agree. Yeah.
That's also where I was going with it. Why is he so mean?
Yeah, like we don't, that's not something that we get, or at least that's not something that I got from the books. Like, he seemed much more even-keeled in the book.
Even in the short story where they met, which is the same events how they met in the show, he's already nicer to Jaskier in that moment in the book.
Yeah, and he's a lot more concerned about Jaskier too.
I'll say he's like best friends for life with Jaskier or Dandelion or whatever. Like, never really questioned. They rib each other and all that kind of stuff and make fun of each other. But in the books, they're just like biffles. And it's like, and in the show, there was, it feels very much this game to me, Game of Thrones inspired. Like, every relationship is complicated, and everyone's kind of. And I love Game of Thrones. I mean, the folks probably are aware of that. They listen to our show or whatever. But yeah, it feels like they wanted to make more relationship drama, and what they lost was this like very pure friendship that exists between the two of them in the books. So,
right. I also think it's Henry Cavill's depiction of Geralt with this gruff exterior. He's really committing to that. And I think someone like Jaskier, who's like closest to him, I guess he's still putting up these guarded walls, and that's what they're going for. I do like their relationship more in the books, and I like certain plot points that happen as a result of their friendship in the books over the show. But I think Henry Cavill does a good job. But there's a piece that's missing for me that I just wish they explored more. And to me, it's like, look, The Witcher is a man who's obviously hurting. He doesn't really like himself that much. He's got this bit of imposter syndrome. He's full of self-doubt and self-loathing. And it's not even that obvious in the books. It's like he's not about that, but it permeates through everything that he does. It's a really subtle character detail that I think the show is just completely missing at this point. And I hope they
tell him, Charles. Yeah, no, that's well said.
Are you ready for my headcanon for the show then?
Let's hear it, Lily.
Yes.
I think they are going to show us Geralt's character growth over the course of having to become a father. They're showing us him being very angry and immature and mean, frankly. And he is going to have to grow up if he's going to raise Ciri. And so this way they're giving us a starting point so that we can see him turn into this thoughtful, introspective, mature Witcher that we know.
There's this angle that Geralt tells himself he can't be close to anyone. He can't love anyone. And I think, the show's made that very clear, the way he treats people. But I think that's kind of what they're doing. It's like, oh, get away from me. I don't want to have anything to do with you. Or, oh, Jaskier, I'm going to say mean things to you because you're around. And I think it's developing that relationship with Ciri and maybe some other people in his life that will cause him to kind of put down the walls a little bit more and maybe buy into the fact that maybe I do feel like a freaky monster sometimes, but that doesn't mean I can't have meaningful interpersonal relationships. It's like a pretty interesting premise.
So I really hope they go there because
me too.
Come on, guys. Geralt, he could be so good.
I guess we'll see because we're getting season 2 at some point this fall, aren't we?
Soon. I don't know if there's a date set or what, but it seems like within the year.
I have a couple of notes here of characters that I thought were better in the book versus better in the show versus entirely identical, which is just Jaskier. Other than his name, Dandelion or Buttercup or Jaskier, he's
Dandelion.
He's the same.
And props to that actor. So for being able to
he did a
capture
great
that
job.
much charisma, and Charles talks about this some with Charles, you got that whole take about how hard it is playing that kind of role.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to deliver like the comic relief over the top flamboyant character without feeling like you're harping on a role that we've already seen a dozen times. To make that feel original and fresh and part of the story and not be cringeworthy is very impressive. And the fact they added those songs into it that
I was
are
really
catchy.
sad that we didn't get toss a coin to your Witcher in the book.
Yeah. I know.
That's an earworm.
It should be on that audio book there, Charles.
It wasn't. It should be, though.
He also did such a good job of making Jaskier a flirt without being weird or creepy about it, which is a very hard line to walk.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does a good job of kind of like reacting to some of the stuff. Like he's kind of like a voice for the audience sometimes in some of these crazier situations, like in The Last Wish when he's like peeking in the window and he's like, I'm out of here. Like, I can't do this. And he's like, oh, what's going on? And we're like, yeah, what's going on? So it's like the way he mirrors audience reaction, is great.
Characters that were better in the book were Neniki. Charles, help.
I said Neniki. I don't know if that's right.
I think Neniki is good. I like it.
Because she existed in the book. I really liked her, though. I had no idea that she existed, obviously, from watching the show. But she's a very cool, matron of a temple who takes no shit from Geralt or anyone else and was excellent.
I hope she shows up in the show. Please. I really enjoyed her.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the Temple of Melitele or something.
Something like that.
But yeah, she's great. I love the framing story. I like that it's all part of this thing from the Lesser Evil where he just wanted to check and make sure that this girl was okay and took this fatal wound and those kind of things. And yeah, the fact that she's kind of like no nonsense, trying to give him some guidance, and he's like this badass monster hunter, and she's telling him like what to do is
he needs
fun.
Some mothering, and she can do it.
He sure does. And if you read more books, you will double down on that for sure.
I'm familiar with some spoilers. Fan fiction is an interesting fusion of all types of the story into one thing. So I have a weird conglomerate of knowledge. Let's just say that.
Yeah, Geralt seems like a good character to breed some very interesting and diverse kinds of fan fiction.
Okay. Calanthe and Yennefer. I said it during the non-spoiler section because I couldn't help myself. In the show. I like Calanthe. I don't know if all of those events in the show are in later short stories, because we don't see that much of her in the book.
She has a lot more screen time in the show than just in this one anthology.
There's a lot more to this whole Ciri backstory stuff that we get, and I would guess Ciri, given her very little page time in the books, is going to make her better in the show, right?
She's not even named in the book that we read for today.
She's just hinted at.
Oh yeah, I forget. Oh okay.
Yeah, and the question of price, it's like, Pavetta's pregnant, and it's like, okay, well, that's the whole thing.
They don't even confirm that. It's only implied that Pavetta is pregnant with Ciri. That is how little of Ciri we see.
Yeah, and she's so great in the TV show. I really appreciate the performance, and she does such a great job. And some Arya Stark vibes.
I was pleasantly surprised in The Witcher 3: The Wild Hunt. You get to play as Ciri for portions of the game, which really gives this character agency in a way that was unexpected but completely loved. That was very cool.
Yeah Ciri is a great character, and her absence in this book is kind of unfortunate, but it's all part of building up to her presence. It's like what's interesting about, when Geralt does meet Ciri, in the show, we get that moment, but in the book, it's like Geralt already has so much history with this character that he's been trying to avoid for forever. And so when they finally meet, it's like, wow, okay, there's all this stuff that has now happened that Geralt knows that Ciri doesn't. So, but I totally agree with Netflix. Like, this is an awesome character. We need her in episode 1, like right away. So it's a line you have to balance.
As two people who have read more of The Witcher than I have, it feels like the Netflix show realized these were amazing characters and needed to be in it from the beginning.
Yeah.
Are the plot lines that we see, Yennefer's backstory, Ciri growing up, Calanthe being a badass bitch, do those actually happen? Or
I don't want to get too much into spoilers for the books, but almost everything that happens was either a short story in The Last Wish or Sword of Destiny, except for the Yennefer stuff, which was just a throwaway line in The Last Wish that turned into this whole backstory thing that I had no idea what was. When I was watching the show, I was like, I've read all the books. What part of this is this? And I was like, I get it now. It makes so much sense. So yeah, it's kind of interesting because I believe there's a throwaway line in The Last Wish where it's like, you used to be a hunchback. And then
it's not even dialogue. So, Geralt is looking at Yennefer and is like, oh, I can see where they fixed you. You must have been a hunchback before, in his head. And Yennefer sees him looking at her and is like, come on. Come on, guy.
Right. So her story up until, again, I'll just say this, the end of the season where there was a big showdown, that is in the books, but much later on. So it's they had to kind of, it must have been a tough job, but they basically smashed all the different scenes from all the books and reorganized them so they could have all the characters at their stories at the beginning and somehow weave them all back and forth and together while still having some sort of forward progression. Ambitious. It's very, the show is kind of, it is a very ambitious project by the show, but I get why they did it. And I think they did a good job.
Because of that, I enjoyed the show quite a bit more because we got these implications of very cool characters in the book, but not enough for me to really go, oh yeah, I love Yennefer. Yeah, Calanthe is the greatest. None of that.
Yeah. There's a part of me that would really enjoy the slow burn of meeting Ciri, but then it's come on, everyone already is going into this loving Ciri, so you just got to give it to them right at the beginning. It's not a character you could just sleep on for a whole season and then reveal in season 2. I mean, you could, but it's very ambitious, and I think they're really trying to sell this project. I don't know if they thought it would be as successful as it was. So,
I also think from another angle, Ciri deserves to have that shown. For sure, as a character, she went through that, and let us see her adventure.
Yeah, her and Yennefer are two great characters that, I don't blame them. The showrunners, Netflix, didn't want to sleep on two strong female lead characters. It's let's not have them in this season. It's no, let's have them from the beginning and let's have an ensemble cast here.
Okay, so the entire genesis for getting you on for this particular episode was to make you read Pratchett.
Yeah.
So for the second book for this episode, we're going to be talking about Wyrd Sisters by Terry Pratchett, which follows the witches. It's really the first in his series that focuses on the witches. It was published in 1980.
We did it.
Here we are.
Yeah. We are. We did it. We read the Wyrd Sisters thanks to your encouragement.
Regardless of your opinion on it, I will rest happy knowing that you have at least read Wyrd Sisters.
Well, that's the thing, because I had listened to your episode you did a while back of where to start with Discworld, and I was one of the people that championed you guys to make that, by the way, back in the day. I was like, please just let me know. And of course there were at one point in the episode, you're so which episode which books should you not start with? And you said the two that Dylan and I read. You said Color of Magic and Mort. It's well, okay, those are the two that, forgive me for reading the first one in the series.
I
That's
also
my bad.
did not read the correct books first, so I don't think no one's going to blame you for that.
To be fair, Charles, like I started there too. I read them in publication order. I didn't read them in maybe the best way to get introduced to the series.
Right. No one says to read it in publication order too. It's like a heavily contested conversation I see online everywhere. It's like where to start.
It's not the best place to start.
No, but thankfully we had you guys to say read Wyrd Sisters, so I didn't have to like go through all that online discourse and stress out. You guys made it very easy.
I'm glad that I could at least convince you, drag you on to talk about Wyrd Sisters with us.
Yeah, you're like our shamans through the Pratchett mountain, you know? It's like you start here, you go this way.
Oh, so can I put that as my byline on my resume?
Of course.
Charles. Yeah.
Terry Pratchett shaman.
Yes.
I am curious what made you go for Wyrd Sister. I know I listened to that episode too, and my sense was you were kind of like pick the topic that interests you as a reader, because there's all sorts of like different kinds of stories. For me, I'm kind of existentialism, so the death stuff interests me, and that's why I went Mort, except you're like the one exception to that rule is Mort. It's like, oh, great. We tried so hard.
We tried.
You went the first book. It's hard to blame you for that. I followed the advice that they hadn't yet given, except for the one caveat to the advice. But then you went Wyrd Sisters as our next foray into Terry Pratchett's work. So I'm kind of curious, like, what was it about this book that is it just one of your favorites or something else?
So for me, I will say that Wyrd Sisters is not my favorite of the Witches novels. I like Witches Abroad and Lords and Ladies better. And Carpe Jugulum too. I like that as well. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the title correctly, but whatever. But I think that there's some character development to the witches that you get in Wyrd Sisters that means that while you can skip it and start later on in their arc, you're a little bit better off if you don't.
Wyrd Sisters is an excellent introduction to Discworld because it has a lot of the concepts that we really love about Discworld. And it also introduces some of the characters that, well, I personally love. Like Nanny Ogg. Can we talk about Nanny Ogg? I know we have loved on Granny Weatherwax before, who is one of the witch triumvirates?
Yeah.
Was that
go for it?
That word correctly?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, you're not going to get any pushback from us.
All right. Well, there's always the three witches. That's a thing. And we have met Granny Weatherwax before, who is the badass, single, unattached, wonderful lady.
If you think of witches as maiden mother crone, she fills the crone role.
I think that sells her short.
Probably. I mean, it's certainly
it's one way of looking at the archetype. Definitely,
it's a reduction. It's a shortening.
Maybe it is too revealing about myself to say that Nanny Ogg, who by your reading fulfills the mother role.
I mean, by Pratchett's reading too. That's not just me.
Yeah. She is a little bit more, well, they're both crass, but Nanny Ogg is crass in a different way. And her matriarchy is just so wonderful.
Granny speaks more to my soul than Nanny.
I think
unsurprisingly.
I think we're being a little bit honest with that.
I think Granny did kind of steal the spotlight in the narrative of this book.
I think Nanny has some good moments, but she is not, like, Granny is more the main character in all of the witches books. Like, she takes precedent.
That's Granny Weatherwax is the character who has been introduced earliest.
Yeah.
Because she appeared in Please Help Me.
Equal Rights,
thank you.
Which is book 3.
But we discussed her as the one character who was introduced the earliest and has stayed the steadiest throughout the entire series, which is pretty impressive.
There's a lot of books in there, a lot of
Yeah.
Well, and she's not in every book, to be fair.
Yeah. I mean, as a relatively novice Pratchett reader over here, it was Granny Weatherwax that stuck out for me too. There's a line, I don't have a quote or anything, but it's like, out of the hierarchy that they didn't have, she was at the top. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty good.
Oh,
Like,
I love that.
Yeah.
That was the perfect way of describing it.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
I would like to take a slight detour to talk about how different but the same witches are between The Witcher, which we discussed previously, and in this book. They both change their appearance. In The Witcher, it's permanent, but in this book, there's some line about how the body knows where it's supposed to be, and so it wears off by tea time or something. And they also are so reliant on respect and reputation. And these books are so different in so many ways, and finding that overlap was kind of magical to me.
Interesting. There's also this idea of like skirting destiny a little bit that kind of permeates through both. Very different methods in which they skirt destiny, but still the fact that that theme is central to both books is also a parallel that is very interesting.
There's also the idea of retelling a known story, where in The Witcher, that's fairy tales, and we get a kind of different look at that.
Exactly.
And in Wyrd Sisters, it is Macbeth by Shakespeare that we're seeing from a different point of view.
Well said. Yeah,
I would also like to interject Hamlet. I mean, the play within a play is definitely Hamlet.
Yeah, so I was thinking about The Lion King, and I'm vaguely aware that The Lion King was based on Hamlet, so I was going to pretend to be smart like Lily actually is and be like, oh, this felt a little like Hamlet, but Macbeth
had the three witches, though,
it's kind of, I guess drawing from both, depending what you're, but this like, all this kind of messed up uncle,
And you have this like matriarch whispering into the ear of the patriarch, like those kinds of things too. That's Macbeth too. If my
shout out to Mr.
English,
Miller,
our
high school English teacher.
Our English teacher. We'll get him famous. We definitely read Macbeth. I don't remember if we read Hamlet, but that's why I know the whole witches thing. And
there's the Duchess. Well, hold on. Where is our spoilers break? And the Duchess, I say ominously.
I mean, all of the beats of the plot are from Macbeth, and some of like there's the aspect about the forest and the blood on the hands, and like that's all taken from Macbeth.
But the main conflict is from Hamlet, which is the play is the thing.
That's true.
Yeah.
Was this a big thing Pratchett did a lot? Like, having not read a lot of his work, like, did he heavily draw from like Shakespearean stuff, or just like it's just this book was kind of what he was doing?
Anything and everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think he decided what to satirize, and then he just went for it. And in this case, it's Shakespeare. But that's not the case. Like for The Color of Magic, for example, which we have said is not really quote unquote true Discworld.
Yeah.
In that it's
I think that's a bad example. I think it's a bad example. I think a better example is the Phantom of the Opera.
Well, there's that too.
Like that is one book that is the Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah, there's that. But I mean, the Color of Magic is very clearly a play on 4 different, like, you've got your Anne McCaffrey there, you have your Jules Verne, like it's kind of the genesis of what you see later on, where he's taking one idea and then riffing off of it and telling it from a new perspective. But it's not always Shakespeare.
No, I mean, I probably went over my head what it was in Mort, but it's
I mean he doesn't do that. Like, it's not that he does that for every single book.
No.
Yeah.
So Mort, at least to my knowledge, that's his own unique story.
Yeah.
But there are some novels where he is playing on a story that's already been told in, modern cultural perception.
Yeah, makes sense. Definitely comes through. It's interesting thinking about it as being in 1980. It's pretty far back compared to that's 41 years ago. That's a long time ago at this
That's
point.
older than any of us.
Yeah.
And you guys are mostly modern fantasy readers, right?
Me even, Charles has a little more like context.
We've read all over the place, but the 80s would be some of the older stuff.
I mean,
a Wizard versus
you tend to gravitate towards the modern stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, we do. On our show, especially. Most of the stuff that we cover is modern with a few nods to the classics.
One of the things we mentioned earlier that is central to the Wyrd Sisters plot is this idea of the crone mother and maiden. And one of my favorite conflicts is between the crone and the mother, or granny and nanny. And they have a insult circle? That's not the right way to describe it. There is a point where they are in a fight and they're flinging insults at each other. And they're basically both sex shaming the other, but from the other side. And it remains funny because neither side wins. We get to see these arguments and these jokes from both angles, and neither one is displayed as right in the text. There's being grumpy, and that's fine.
Yeah, I don't know what I was expecting going into this, but there's a lot of like sexual innuendos and talk and things like that. It was funny. I was laughing. I was appreciating it, but I wasn't expecting that from the Wyrd Sisters. But Granny and Nanny, they go at it.
It's an unexpectedly dirty book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sarah, would you read us your dirty quote?
Okay, I can read the quote that I picked out as being particularly noticeably dirty.
I have one, and if this is the one you're trying to pull, stop me. But I don't have the actual quote, but there's a point where they had the baby and they're like, shouldn't we give it some sort of magical gift? Isn't that like what witches do? And I think Granny was like, oh, well, we could, and then all Pratchett wrote was all the other witches reacted with like, what? Implying that, she was trying to increase a certain body part.
That's not the quote that I was thinking of.
But that is a perfect example of these dirty witches.
Yeah.
That is.
Yeah, exactly. Not a bad gift.
There's something to be said for it.
Could do worse.
So the quote that I am thinking of is on page 146, where the witches are talking about Black Alice, who is kind of this famous, bad witch. And they're talking about something that she did. But the biggest thing she ever did, said Nanny, ignoring the interruption, was to send a whole palace to sleep for 100 years until she hesitated. Can't remember. Was there rose bushes involved, or was it spinning wheels in that one? I think some princess had to finger... No, there was a prince. That was it. Finger a prince? Said Magrat uneasily.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
It's just, you can... If you're not expecting the innuendo, you can just kind of gloss over it. But if you see it's there, then boy, it's there.
And there's something about in my head, the image of Terry Pratchett is not this person making sexual jokes. It's so it does catch, or it caught me off guard, I'll say, when they would come up. It's just not how I think of him, but I don't know him that well. I haven't read a lot of his work.
It's definitely not something that, I first read these books. I read basically all of Discworld, or everything that was published at that point. I read when I was in 7th or 8th grade, so I was 13, 14 or so. And some things like that just went over my head. That's not something that I recognized as a teenager.
Yeah.
Reading these books.
Right. Yeah. He's not like, it's not like a raunchy book, but there's all kinds of like innuendos and things in them. And it kind of, I don't know, it kind of makes it like, okay, Granny's actually kind of cool, you know? It's like that kind of character development. You're like, okay, like she's not just like some senile old
that's really
lady.
important for her character. She is not ignorant of sex. She just chooses to not participate, which is a completely different vibe, I think, for her.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you contrast it with Nanny, who is has had 3 husbands, has 15 children, who knows how many grandchildren, like an entire dynasty, basically. It's a very important contrast, especially when it's frankly, it's handled really well, I think.
So that's something that, for whatever my perspective on this is worth, I was very impressed considering the context of 40 years ago here to be writing these like strong, well-developed female characters. And it was a long time ago, you know, like even the idea of having these 3 women who are each like a unique part of this trio as the protagonists of this story was probably pretty unusual, I would think, in the fantasy genre. I don't know. That's what I would expect. We do lean a little more on the modern on FTF, so maybe I'm missing context, but it feels that way.
No, because to me, it's like sometimes you read a book that has like innuendos and stuff, and it's hard to like be taken seriously past that, you know, and you kind of invite criticism sometimes when you bring like certain parts of sexuality and things into fantasy books. I feel like you take a risk as an author when you start to incorporate those elements in your books. And I just thought this was all done in good fun, you know, and I just appreciated it. It's a very non-controversial, funny, inoffensive way to spice up the dialogue and spice up these characters. You know, to me, they became way more interesting when I started to realize what was happening. So yeah, I thought it was very well done.
But isn't that like noteworthy that however long ago someone was able to, in this case Pratchett, was able to write a story that brought in sexuality in a way that we can still consider in good fun. You know, it hasn't aged poorly, I would say, this particular book.
Right.
If you consider it to something like The Witcher, which we read, that has a lot of sexuality to it, but it all kind of strips the woman of any agency, and it's told in a very male perspective. And this is less that. I mean, this is just women having fun, which I think translates better to a modern reader.
Yeah, and I think it just speaks to, you know, Terry Pratchett's fan base is wide, vast, and all ages, and still very passionate fan base to this day. They're making shows of his work and stuff like that, even still today. So what you were getting at, Liz, like how impressive is this that we can still revisit what could easily be considered a dated sexual thing, but it's actually just fun and entertaining as it was 40 years ago. I think that's a great accomplishment. I think even authors in like the 90s and even the 2000s, you know, it's like, oh, this weird sexuality piece to this makes it so dated, and you know, but it's not the same thing at all with this
he was
story.
able to interact with this narrative in a way that is relatable, I think, to a lot of people, which is, I would say, Pratchett's strong suit. We've gotten a little bit into this conversation, but we should probably give our audience a hint of what this book is about. We didn't do this for The Witcher. Everyone knows what The Witcher was about. It's fine.
I don't know. The people who wrote the backs of the books didn't know what it was about.
Well played, Charles.
Did they even read it? That's a good point.
Yeah. They just looked at the cover and was like, I get it. I get the idea.
It's a retelling of Macbeth and Hamlet from the witch's perspective.
I think that's the perfect. No, that's the perfect entry into this book. So we have witches who are used to being what is frankly probably a culturally accurate view of witches in society, in that they are very important healthcare providers. And they're used to the respect that comes from that role. And there is a new king, and there's some political intrigue. And I think that is probably as much as we should say.
Starring some raunchy witches.
Oh,
Yeah.
We got the raunchiest witches.
But it's all in good fun.
Yeah. No, it's sex positive raunchy witches.
Yeah, I like their relationship with the sisters, or they seem to have like this. They've known each other for a long time, and they just fall right into it, and they go in and out of arguments, conversations, debates, whatever, and it kind of just parallels Pratchett's whole thing of like, it's kind of all in the end, it's kind of nonsensical anyway. We're just kind of just having fun in these moments, and just see that personified in the relationship between these witches. I thought was,
and something that sticks out to me about this book is the percentage of it that is dialogue is so high, right? Like, and I'm especially once we start really going with the Wyrd Sisters, like with the witches, is that we get these pages that are just like dialogue, which I appreciate that, because I like banter, I like dialogue, and I like character interactions. And something that I like about Pratchett's writing is that he's not trying too hard to be overly descriptive. Yeah, sometimes there's a little like not setting the scene as much as could be like, I'm like, wait, where are we? Like, I know we've been talking for a while, but that being said, it's I always like a dialogue heavy, like banter heavy book. I appreciate that.
I think we saw a momentous occasion in this book, in that we got the rare triple footnote. I don't think we've seen that before.
Let's see if I can find where that was. Triple footnote?
Oh, there's a couple.
I know there's one page that I was like mostly footnote. I was like, I was like, what is going on here? It's like, yeah.
One of the things that I associate with Discworld are the footnotes.
It's the footnotes, yeah. And you guys probably don't see footnotes very often, I would assume.
No, there's
no.
Yeah.
Yeah, the footnotes are definitely new. The only other thing I can think of that has like a lot of footnotes, I haven't read this yet, is Infinite Jest. But other than that, footnotes, it's like Pratchett can't help himself but like insert a little bit more witticism on top of the witticism already in there. I think that's something that I see from the footnotes and things like that is just like Pratchett's I think, Charles, you used the phrase like wonderfully itself at some point on FTF or something like that. I don't know if that was, no, you're just shrugging. Like, I just say
I mean,
stuff
it sounds
like
me,
but
I don't think it was in reference to Pratchett.
I'm saying, well, I'm trying to draw from your wonderful phrasing to say that Pratchett is very willing to be wonderfully himself in how he's writing. And I think that when that comes through, then authors actually being themselves and having a good time writing the book, which it very much does with Pratchett, it's something that is easy to appreciate.
It's also something that I absolutely associate with Discworld as a whole. And we have seen it in smaller points in earlier Discworld books, which y'all weren't part of that conversation, but I'm bringing it in anyway.
I've been listening.
We appreciate that, Dylan.
Yeah. We're now seeing it sort of evolve to the point that I am familiar with for later Discworld, which is this footnote inside of a footnote inside of a footnote. It's absurd in the way that the Discworld is absurd. The form fits the function in a really beautiful way.
Yeah, Pratchett's just having fun with the format and bringing more absurdity into the story, not even just the narrative, but the whole reading experience in itself is just another format to be absurd and tell jokes and things like that, which I can appreciate.
Well, we promise it's not a loaded question.
I feel like you would never say that before something that is not a loaded question. I promise that if it wasn't loaded, you wouldn't have to preface it. But let's hear it, Lily. Let's get that loaded question.
What do you got? Let's hear it.
You have both read Pratchett before.
True.
And do you feel like this book is a more accessible introduction to the world? Or not? That's what we want to know.
I think Charles will give a more coherent answer, but if you're still thinking about it, Charles, I have one.
Go ahead.
I think that this is probably a better introduction for the general person than the one that I read, which was Mort. So I'm with you too on your assessment of Mort as kind of that exception to the rule of start with the thing that interests you at the beginning of that line. I think, this is kind of I think it seems, with my very limited experience, like a very good litmus test of like, is a Pratchett book going to be for you? Where Mort is like, you got to be really into, I think, like the death and existentialism and be willing to put up with some of the, you talked about on one of your episodes, like not the strongest female characters in Mort and Pratchett still finding his voice, I guess, in some ways at that time. But yeah, I feel like Wyrd Sisters is hitting more of a like generalist approach of like, do like Pratchett and his vibe more than Mort seemed to be doing.
That's well said, Dylan. I feel like I need to preface mine by no one should ever take my advice off a Terry Pratchett related business. If
I almost did a spit take.
That's the best compliment I could get. But Lily and Sarah are experts. They already recorded an episode on where to start, and I recommend going and listening to that and doing what they say. That's what I did once they told me to read Wyrd Sisters. I read it. So that's what I would recommend first. So that being said, my take on it, I've read Color of Magic and I've read Wyrd Sisters and I've watched the Good Omens TV show. And I feel like going into Wyrd Sisters, I had an idea of what reading a Terry Pratchett novel was like. And I think Wyrd Sisters continued to deliver on that. So for me, it's like, yeah, it's all fun and silly and it's, he's satirical and all that. For me, I'm like, yeah, start anywhere. Just see if it's for you and just read it. Like, start with the first book and watch him progress, or start where someone who like loves the series tells you to start. I'm fine either way. I think they're both like, they both gave me the Terry Pratchett experience I was expecting. So I'm kind of like, yeah, it was good. Good place to start. No preference here, which is why you should listen to me, because you really can't. I told you to start anywhere.
I'm all about not wasting people's time.
That's fair. That's fair. No, and I appreciated your guidance too, because it's like, it's such a widely talked about thing amongst Terry Pratchett fans, is like where everyone should start, and so it's like, oh boy.
I mean, but I also feel sorry, Dylan. You can go ahead if you
trust me. Your voice on Terry Pratchett is going to be a much more important one than mine.
I was just gonna say, I also feel like if you read Wyrd Sisters and you don't enjoy it, I think you have a more well-rounded view of what Terry Pratchett and what Discworld is about, and you can say, well, I gave it a good shot, like I tried and I didn't enjoy it, this just isn't for me. Whereas if you start at the beginning or at more, there's maybe room to say, well, these aren't good starting points, maybe I will give it another shot and read something that is more like inherently Discworld than those books are.
Yeah. One thing I appreciated is like all these silly witticisms. It just felt like, Pratchett wasn't holding anything back in his narrative.
Yeah.
Whatever silly thought entered his head, he was like, if it's good, I'll write it in, and I appreciated that, this like unfiltered kind of like, wow, I'm getting this guy's raw energy here. And I love that. And he's willing to kind of break up the conformity. He's willing to go against the grain in terms of like maybe storytelling or narration or description or describing things in a way that like you're taking weird perspectives on observations of things. And you're like, what is he even going on? And then you're like, oh wow, this guy sees the world like is seeing the world in very interesting ways. Like there's a scene where the former king was. Are we into spoiler territory?
Not quite.
Yeah, we can't. But I check. Okay, great. But there's just descriptions that come along that may have spoilers in them where they're describing something, and it's like, oh, it's kind of a funny way to write how someone would see that situation. It's like he purposely takes an unusual perspective on things for comedy sake, and I enjoyed that about him very much.
To avoid spoilers for Wyrd Sisters, skip to 156:02.
So what I was trying to say in the spoiler-free version was when the former king is a ghost looking at his own body, and he's describing his body, and he's like, it's like almost existential, but it's fully comical at the same time. Like I wish I had quotes from it, but he was like, it looked good for a body or something, like even though you're not supposed to see it, one of those like crazy witticisms about looking at your own corpse, and it is funny, and it kind of that the book is just nonstop those kinds of like funny observations, and the way he chooses to write a narrative is always super funny. And the creativity in writing a setting and a narration in a genre where people get so specific, like Lord of the Rings, which like, and then Frodo was walking up the grassy hill to see the stones and all that. Terry Pratchett would just find a way to satirize that and explain it in a way that's so bizarre that kind of catches you off guard, but is also very funny, which is so his style.
You did just compare him to J.R.R. Tolkien, which I have a huge problem with on the front of my books.
Yeah, I saw.
You are not wrong.
I have that on the back of my book, and I heard you talk about this in a recent episode too, where it's like everything, and this everything is a relative to Tolkien for some reason with Pratchett. It's like, and mine says think J.R.R. Tolkien with a sharper, more satiric edge, and it's like, what? Like, are you like? It's not like honestly. Is it just that it's fantasy or what? Like,
yeah, you could start any fantasy book with take Tolkien and then do this.
Yeah,
and you have this
like,
fantasy book. It's like, okay.
I think it's better. It's better compared to Douglas Adams. I think Douglas Adams is the nonsense satirical sci-fi, and then Terry Pratchett is the nonsense satirical fantasy.
Yeah.
Those two I would compare.
I feel like it's almost like if you were writing that comparison now, it would be think George R.R. Martin, which is equally ridiculous.
Maybe even more so.
Yeah. It's like think him and then unthink him, because it's a totally different experience. Which he might like that review, actually. It's like think about George R.R. Martin and then forget about him and then think about this, because they're not the same at all, which is the only way you could bring them up. Douglas Adams is a great comparison, and that's what I thought of when I read Color of Magic. I'm like, oh, this is the fantasy version of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I love those books too. I think those books are awesome. So yeah, it's a similar vein. This like insane observational like narration comedy that just doesn't pull back on being silly and creative too. It's like weirdly creative the way they're thinking and telling jokes.
Exactly. That's such a better comparison in my opinion.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I only brought up Tolkien to say how very different they approach the same thing, like describing a setting. Like Tolkien will give you exactly what the setting looks like in very direct terms, almost like a textbook. and then Pratchett will go out of his way to not explain things simply or directly. He'll take you through this meandering thought process, like take you back. He'll explain it backwards from the opposite perspective, and he'll cut across the same impression.
I think that's
too.
really valid, because that's not comparing him to Tolkien, that's contrasting him with Tolkien. which is not.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I was doing the whole time, Lily. See? Contrasting with Tolkien, absolutely.
And that's why the cover of the book is wrong.
It's pretty wrong.
Yet another thing that these two books have in common, right?
Nailed it. Nice, Charles.
Well, this is more of a meta conversation, but we do have an ongoing question of, is the summary of the book accurate? Because so often they are not.
Yeah,
this is a tough plot to describe. I could, if you had told me describe the plot of this book, I don't know what I'd say. I don't know what this book was about. I just kind of read this whole thing and I was like, okay, there's some stuff that happened. It was pretty wild.
It's like the plot isn't the point. And I think that's part of what you're getting at there, Charles, is like,
yeah, exactly.
It doesn't really matter. And that's kind of how we're in the spoiler territory now, right? Like, it doesn't matter how it kind of ends with an intentional whimper, I would say. It's kind of like an anticlimax in a lot of ways. It's like the wrong person ends up being the heir. It's like, and then the witches are just kind of like, all right, well, like, see you later. It's like, and I think I really wonder what Terry Pratchett was like as a man. I hear he was like an incredible man, like all these really amazing things about him, but also just like, I bet he was a very maundering, like silly person, because he just saw the world through this interesting lens. And he's also, but like, he'll sneak up on you with things that just drop a ridiculous amount of wisdom on you, which is very interesting. It's like he'll drop lines, and I'm not gonna be quick enough on the draw to pick one, but he'll drop lines that just blow your mind out of nowhere, like right after making you laugh. So it's very interesting how he'll do that.
That is, I think, why we almost called this segment "A Spoonful of Sugar Makes the Pratchett Go Down" or something.
I don't remember what you wanted to call it.
No, we called it what I wanted to call it. But we eventually came up with a title that was probably better. And it just referenced the fact that he makes such scathing commentary on reality, but because it is cushioned in this frame of fantasy, it is so much easier to interact with.
Right.
Yeah, scathing's an interesting word for it, and I agree. He seems to take on a lot of social norms and society and work and jobs and what we think is important. There's something kind of liberating about it too. It's just like, oh yeah, you can just do whatever you want, like these constructs are all kind of silly and we can make fun of all of them. It's like having a job is like a silly, crazy thing if you think about it. And I think that's what Pratchett sets out to do. He's like, how can I make this idea of, a witch with the heirs, like a baby that's the heir of a dead king, and how can I make that as silly as possible? And he takes on jobs. How can I make jobs as silly as possible? How can I make kings as silly as possible? Death as silly as possible? Ghosts, haunting, magic. And it's like, he's just finding like the humanity in it, and he brings it all down to a level that we can all just kind of laugh at and enjoy, which is a very wholesome.
And like 9 pages in, he's got death on there, and he's dropping lines like, when this king dies, it says he was also one of those rare individuals who are totally focused in time, like about being present, and he's goes on to say, most people aren't. They live their lives as a sort of temporal blur around the point where their body actually is, anticipating the future or holding on to the past. They're usually so busy thinking about what happens next that the only time they ever find out what's happening now is when they come to look back on it. Most people are like this. They learn how to fear because they can actually tell down at the subconscious level what is going to happen next. It's already happening to them. It's like, whoa, wait, weren't you just making like a silly sex innuendo? Like, where is this coming?
Yeah.
And he drops that. It's like, what?
Yeah, Dylan, that would be the quote that you pulled from that book. That would be your
That's
quote.
a metaphysical commentary combined with, let's make a joke about fingering.
Yeah, but it's like, where is this going? Yeah, so we'll sneak those up on you. It's like, wait, that sounds like it came from Fight Club.
I want to bring it back to something that you said earlier, Dylan. Where it sounded like you were a little unhappy with how the story ended because, like, we have this person on the throne who is not actually part of the royal line. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book is how it sets up this reveal that the fool is related to the king when it turns out that actually it's the person that we think is the prince is actually, like, his father is not the king. His father is this commoner. So that was a reveal that I really liked, but it sounded that it didn't hit the same way for you.
Think for me, it's more just like at a certain point of reading it, there's a level of like me realizing that investment in the actual, like, what happens at the end of this story plot event is like not getting it. So I guess I was like, right? It's like, okay, well,
so
like,
true.
anything can happen. And it's like, it can be clever how he pulls it off or whatever, but it's not like about like who wins. It's, you know, to contrast with Game of Thrones, it's not who gets,
The point isn't really the act, it's the perception.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like it's how the characters perceive what has happened, not what has actually happened.
Yeah.
And that they have set up from the very beginning.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will admit that if Sarah and I had not spoken about this book before I had finished reading it, I would not have actually followed that section of it. There's a lot of talk about, like crawling through windows and blah, blah, blah.
There's the king exercising his right to go sleep with unmarried women.
Sure, yes, all of that. But if you and I had not previously spoken about the specific lineage of the fool, I don't think I would have followed it at all. It was a little, I won't say sloppy, but I don't think it was clear enough.
I thought it was pretty clear in the very end. Like, I mean, the whole setup is like, obviously he's setting it up so that you think that the fool is the king's son.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that the revelation was clear enough for me personally, anyway.
Yeah, I kind of mirrored Dylan's sentiment, where by the time like things were getting flipped and flopped, and you're this and you're that, and I'm this and then that, I'm just like, okay, I have to just acknowledge that I'm reading a Terry Pratchett novel. Yeah. Things are just getting silly, and I'm not even going to try and understand it. You know, when Dylan said that, I was like, he said what I was trying to say, which is like, yeah, I recognize the book I'm in, and it's just like I'm not even going to try and like see if this is all really connected or not. It's just going to be silly and chaotic, and that's just kind of the spirit of this book. So I just kind of rolled with it all, and I just took it all in at face value. The fact that there is those connections, I'm impressed by. I didn't catch them, but yeah, I was just rolling with it the whole time. I was like, okay, this is silly.
I think it helps that I have read this book more. I mean, obviously you two have only read it the once, and Lily, I don't know how often you've read it, but I think that I can safely say that I've read it more than you have. So it's easier to find this nuance when you're treading, old ground.
Well, I think that is a compliment to the book, that someone who has not read it before can read the plot and go, yeah, it's fun, and I'm down with that. Let's keep going. And someone who is rereading it can go, I am seeing these breadcrumbs and I am following them and I am on board with them. Like, those are two different stories and he has told it at the same time.
Yeah.
That's very good.
Yeah.
I'm just fortunate that I could benefit from the experience of Sarah and Lily here. I'm
Well,
all
and
these things
we're
about
very
this
happy
book.
to go on this journey with you for the first time.
Well, it made me feel very confident. I was like, okay, I'm doing this.
Yeah. No better voices to be guiding our Discworld journey.
If you never read another Discworld book, I will still be happy.
I think, well,
okay, we got that on recording, right?
We do have that on record.
Yeah, you gotta hear that. Yeah. No, I think I'm blanking on the name, but it's like Reaper's something, right? Like Reaper Man, the next death one. I think
Reaper Man. Yeah.
I know at some point you're thinking of asking us like if we're planning on continuing or what, right? Like,
yeah, that was a question that I had, was whether or not you had enjoyed, because I know that you had been a little unsure about continuing Pratchett after reading, The Color of Magic and more. It just didn't speak to you guys.
Yeah.
So I had been wondering whether you thought that this had been intriguing enough, vibed with you enough to continue on in the series. And it kind of sounds like maybe no, but
Dylan, you want to take this one?
I can't speak for both of us, but I can speak for me, which is like, I appreciate what Terry Pratchett is doing, and and I appreciate all these, like the irreverence of it and the investment and that kind of stuff. And I think I'm just still figuring out where I land. And I think it's like, this was kind of like, okay, I'm getting a sense for Pratchett. I'm getting a sense for like certain times where I'm like, he blows my mind. And then certain times where I'm like, okay, like, I don't know if this part was for me as much as other parts. And I think that has left me in this kind of like gray space of at some point, I'd like to read the next one in the line of books that interest me most, which is those death ones, and see what happens. And maybe I'm someone who just ends up really liking those, because of course my favorite scene was where Death came in and like,
Death,
and that was
Death is pretty
and
great.
there's like two scenes with him or at least
Yeah.
really like it. So
Well, that I think that's a very good point. In our episode about where you should start with Discworld, we were pretty clear that you should start with the topic that interests
Yeah.
you. And it sounds like maybe Witches was not your jam, which is great. So what is your jam?
I didn't dislike it, for the record. I'm like,
No, I didn't say that.
Yeah.
No, I said not your jam.
Not my jam. That's fair.
That's
Yes.
completely
Yeah.
different.
That's fair. That's fair.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Witches, maybe not. But then there's Death, which maybe is.
I also think that maybe you would enjoy Small Gods.
Okay, Small Gods. Yeah, I mean, I'm of the attitude, these kind of things that's like, yeah, like you said the phrase earlier, like your jam. It's like everyone's got their own thing. And that's part of what's kind of cool about the idea of Discworld. I'm still like figuring out, because I have only read 2 books, is like the idea that there's supposed to be kind of a line of books for everyone. And Pratchett trying to take his voice and give it to all these different jams, if you will. So, yeah, I think I'm like TBD. And I think Wyrd Sisters is a great, like, that's what I was thinking, is like, okay, if you really walk away from this, like, I could never read another book by this guy, then you probably follow that as like, okay. But if you walk away from it, where kind of I'm at, where I'm like, okay, like, when he's talking about the things that interest me a lot, and I like the banter and stuff. It's not like, but when he's talking about things that like really intrigue me, I'm like, oh crap, this guy's got some interesting things to say here about this. So that's, it's like, gray space for me of like, but I guess in some ways, like the best one can hope for is an openness to trying another book by an author afterward. Within, there's also the like, I need to pick up the next one, but I'm not there. But I'm in the like, let's see when you
a sort of liminal state. And I also really want to emphasize that like, there's nothing wrong with with reading a book and deciding that this author isn't for you. Like I'm a huge fan of Terry Pratchett, But if that just doesn't work for you, then that just doesn't work for you, and that's totally valid. You know?
Yes, of course.
Like we
feel the same way. Oh yes. No, I think at some point it's not. I've got Charles and I have this huge schedule that he's got figured out. I have all these books I'm going to read that I'm very excited about. Of course, Charles, he's staring me down. Yes, and at some point I'd like to do Reaper Man, and if that one doesn't work, that would be the sign to me of like, no, not for me. So, that's where I'm at.
I think that's a perfect point, though. People discuss Discworld as if it is this one continuous series, but it's really not. You might like one piece of it.
That's true. When you have 14 books that span decades, it's like hard to think that you can just blanket statement the whole thing.
You said 14. I think it's 40.
It's 41, I think.
Wheel of Time.
I was thinking of Wheel of Time. It's 41.
It's a lot of books.
Yeah, there are a lot of books.
I think it is doing the series a disservice if you say you have to like all of them.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think there are people who do like all of them, like me, but at the same time, you can still be a fan of Discworld even if it's just a limited part of Discworld, you know, or even if it's just one book. Like you can say, I really like this book and the rest weren't for me. Like that doesn't make you less of a fan.
That's the whole point of the series.
Yeah.
That is what it's good at.
I think there's no point in gatekeeping, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
Well said.
Yeah.
Let people enjoy what they enjoy. They can't do much. Yeah, you know,
exactly.
how could one say it better than that? I think Terry Pratchett would have been proud of that kind of phrase in there, Sarah. It's like I think that's kind of how that's a sense of that I got from it as an author. It's like have fun, like do your thing. This irreverence comes from this like real place of him enjoying what he enjoys. It feels like, which is like just writing silly, irreverent stuff but that's meaningful to me.
I have a whole rant prepared. I will begin this conversation, but I welcome input. And again, please tell me that I'm wrong. Please disagree with me. Okay. I would like to preface that.
I will happily disagree with you if I feel the need
or
to.
Agree with me. That's also nice.
I'm happy to do that too. We'll see. It depends what take you got.
So this is actually a momentous occasion because a few days ago, that's not true. A few months ago, I called up Sara with a huge complaint about Witcher fan fiction.
Okay.
And that is actually the true genesis for this podcast.
It was part of our origin story.
Yes.
It's true.
Oh. Wow.
Yes.
Witcher fan fiction.
And I will now drunkenly reenact that rant to you today.
Wow.
You're welcome.
I'm going to lean back a little bit and enjoy this.
We are all familiar with the episode where Geralt is extremely mean to Jaskier.
Yes.
That's every episode.
There's
No,
one
but
special one.
but the really bad one.
With the goat person?
No,
or is that
like,
the one with the genie?
There's the one where
the one with
dragon.
the gin.
there's like toward, he just like he like has an outburst on him. It's like the last episode of the season. And they just like leave on crappy terms.
Dylan's got me.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm with you. I'm with you now. Okay, it's been a while.
Yeah, well, because I'm invested in that relationship too. I mean, maybe not at the level of the fan fiction you're going to get into.
Dylan secretly reads fan fiction.
Hey, I'm open to reading anything. I just it's not something that I've gotten as into or anything like that. But yeah,
I will start by saying I did not read fan fiction. I did not seek out fan fiction that paired Geralt with Jaskier, because that wasn't like how I particularly read the show. there is just a lot of it.
Yeah.
And if there is a lot of it, that means you can find something good in it. It's the cream of the crop. That's how it works, right? So, this episode, where Geralt is extremely mean to Jaskier, it may not surprise you that there are a lot of fan fictions revolving around this interaction and Geralt apologizing.
Oh.
Geralt apologizing to Jaskier for that moment is a big thing. But why the hell do people try to ruin it by saying Geralt was just trying to protect him the whole time? I was just trying to save you from me. No, he was being mean and he deserves to apologize. Don't ruin it.
I agree. And this kind of bridges nicely into my piece about Witcher, which I said earlier on the show, which is that there's this piece that nobody understands about Geralt, which is that he's a self-loathing guy, and he's very much is full of doubts and insecurities, and he's a guy who hunts monsters. He doesn't know who he was taken from his parents, but he's a really good Witcher, but he's kind of upset that he is a Witcher because he doesn't have his family. He's been enhanced through genetic mutations, which gives him this weird thing that no one can love me because I'm this weird creature thing. I see creatures everywhere, that kind of thing. So when you're that convinced that you can't have love or feel relationships because you've gone through these mutations and you're just supposed to be this thing, and you're not, because what's interesting about Geralt is we're told, Witchers don't have emotions.
That's clearly
how many
not
times
true.
have we been told that? And it's clearly not true, but Geralt says it. He's bought into that, yet he's still very emotional. So he tries to play himself off as someone that doesn't have emotions. So when someone's just trying to be his friend, hey, I'm very confident in who I am. I'm Jaskier the Bard, and I love myself and I express myself. I'm a musician. I'm a, flirtatious guy, and I like you. That's everything Geralt, I think, wishes he could be. And so if he acts out because he's insecure about all of that, that's powerful. And that's a side of Geralt's character that I think gets underappreciated and glanced over a lot. So this idea of being a protector, totally undercuts that whole subtle nuance that is in, Andrzej Sapkowski's work.
But I love that reading of it. And saying Geralt was going, I was pushing you away to protect you, completely undercuts that.
So, Lily, before this, you asked us to try to disagree with you. So I think I'm going to try, which is I guess it's it is possible that is what Geralt thought he was doing, right? That's a story he was telling himself, that he was doing it to protect him. I don't think so, which is part of why I'm begrudgingly trying to make this but I think it's more of the Geralt's insecure and he lashes out you've been saying, but I guess theoretically, if people sometimes do try to push people away to protect them, and they tell themselves they're doing it. It happens all the time in Wheel of Time for Sarah's nodding. That's a big thing that the characters do in that, and that's a real human behavior that people think it's not. I don't recommend it as a strategy for existing in your interpersonal world, but it's a thing that people do. And if Geralt was doing that, I guess it's okay to apologize with that, but don't make it a now it's okay. Make it a this is where I was coming from. That's a ridiculous thing to do, and then I'm sorry, I guess. But I don't think that's actually what was happening.
You're secretly agreeing with me.
I know.
My point is that Geralt was not.
He's disagreeing with you in a way Dylan does, which is you'll still like me and I still agree with you, but
the point is that Geralt was not the victim. And these stories that are painting Geralt as oh, I'm just so bad at relationships. Everyone needs to pander to me and apologize to me because I'm just bad at interpersonal relationships. Is that don't vibe with me.
Yeah.
It deprives Geralt of his agency there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there needs to be more moments where we feel sorry for Geralt. I don't think we get that a lot because he's such a badass in a lot of ways. It's like we don't ever really end up feeling sorry for him because he's super handsome and jacked and can defend himself in any kind of physical altercation. But there's all these relationship issues that he runs into, and there's all this internal struggle that he goes through, and it's this contrast between his beliefs and the universe that he lives in that are constantly clashing. It can't be an easy way to live life. So more of that needs to be seen. But I think it's so easy to put him in this role of I'm the hard and protector role. I'm like the action hero of this movie, where it's like, okay, you're an action hero, but he is more than that, even though it's cool enough already to just be the action hero. Like that's all you really needed to sell me. But we get more than that, which I think gets a bit understated.
I think it ruins his character too. Well, his character in the show, which is he had a low moment. Give him that low moment so that he can overcome it. Don't undercut it by going, oh, he knew he was being hunted by something, and so he had to put someone away to protect them. Like that's,
gotcha.
That's lame.
So part of it is,
and I mean, there's all these beautiful things that could happen with Yennefer too, because Yennefer is someone who, do people love me for me, or do they love me because my body was transformed? Or do they love me because I am casting some magical spell over them, or they like me because I can cast magic? That's the thing about Yennefer and Geralt's relationship. They both have very similar experiences and both feel this imposter syndrome, self-loathing thing. And they drive people away as a result of that. And they're both like masters in their craft. So it's what makes their relationship super interesting. But I feel like we, again, have to come back to these things of like, we need to make it like Game of Thrones. Henry Cavill has to be a badass at all times. Like we need to deliver on these things. And I think the show's getting there. I think it will continue to evolve as we get more time with these characters. But I just think it's like an opportunity missed of like, how are these characters ever going to feel love or express love for each other when their lives are so messed up and their bodies are so messed up and all this magical change that's been affected on them,
I agree completely. My pet peeve was about garbage fan fiction.
Well, Charles taking it to the next level.
I have no experience with fan fiction,
and I think
trust me, there is garbage fan fiction, and they are wrong, and I am mad.
I think part of it, Lily, is it sounds like you're reading stuff where they're like changing the facts of the situation to make Geralt actually doing the right thing. Which is like, that does take away from, the vulnerability and the insecurity that you're all talking about. So I think, you don't want Geralt to actually have been right for doing it. You want him to have made a mistake and learn from it, because that's how people learn things.
Yes. Yeah. And that is the emotional payoff in apologizing for a mistake, is saying, I fucked up. Not, but I try to do the right thing. That's so different.
Sometimes you fuck up while trying to do the right thing, though, right? Like,
well, in real life, that's fine.
Yeah.
But we all saw Geralt be very mean.
He messed it up.
I don't think any of us are going to argue. I would like to think that none of us are going to argue.
Yeah.
He was trying to be nice when he was very mean.
No, he messed. Yeah.
Gotta own it, Geralt. You gotta own it.
Yeah. Apologize for realsies. And that is my pet peeve, is fan fiction trying to smooth that shit over instead of dealing with the garbage.
That's a hallmark of fan fiction, is that they it tries to smooth things over that maybe shouldn't be smoothed over. So, guys, thank you so much for coming on. We have really, really enjoyed having you discuss The Witcher and Wyrd Sisters with us. Can you tell us a little bit about A, what we can expect from your next episodes of the podcast, and B, where you can be found on the internet?
Yes. Well, guys, it was a pleasure recording with you as always. Love the collab. You can find us on social media at the FTF Podcast with the number 1 on the end on Twitter. That's the best place to reach us. And Instagram as well at the FTF Podcast. And wherever you can listen to podcasts.
And upcoming episodes, things we can look forward to.
This is kind of your role here, Charles. I guess we've got Red. I don't know when this episode's airing either. Red Country's coming out.
Yes, Red Country.
You really put me on the spot. I don't know the schedule. Oh, we're talking to Christian. We're talking to Christian
Artifact Space
about Artifact Space.
Yeah, I was going to say you've teased a little bit about that Artifact Space.
Yep, yeah. Nicholas Eames.
Charles has all sorts of other stuff. Kings. Oh yes, we just
Kings of the Wild.
Kings of the Wild is coming up, and I'm really excited.
You convinced that I need to move that to the top of my TBR.
Yeah,
so
it's an awesome book.
Yes.
Thank you and no thank you.
Oh, no, it's really good.
Yeah. I know that feeling. But Dylan's read it before. I've not. Super excited to give it a shot.
And you said in the episode that your discussion of that will be coming out mid-July or so?
Yes, if all goes according to plan. We actually had to push back. We were trying to squeeze it in, so it's a matter of weeks.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, guys, please go to Fiction Fans on Apple Podcasts, give a 5-star rating, leave a review if you have the time.
You're going off book.
They undersold themselves. What can I say? Yeah, I mean, they said, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts. Okay, rate 5 stars, write a review. If you have another device, go ahead and follow them wherever you listen to your podcast. Check them out on social media, as they said, at Fiction Fans Pod. And
you want to just bring it home at this point, Charles, or should I
No, it's your turn. It's your turn.
Okay, thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Do we all say bye? Oh, bye. It's a
yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.